on our first day of opening up Exchange Street, like any new opening, it was kind of crazy and kind of nuts. And halfway through our day, this was actually Halloween, so 5 years ago today, our fryer broke. And so we were kind of scrambling, getting donuts from Park Avenue and frying them over there to bring them over to Exchange, and trying to decide what we were going to do for the next day. On that short of notice, the only one we were able to find was in Boston. So we went down to Boston in my pickup truck, loaded up a fryer, drove back, got back into Portland maybe 9-ish at night, and it was raining. And I'm trying to lift it over the threshold, and my foot slipped out from under me, and the fryer came down on my ankle and crushed every bone in my right ankle. I'm not 100% certain that the Holy Donut would be here today if that didn't happen. Laying me up like that, I couldn't make donuts and I couldn't serve donuts. So I really dove into financials of the company, and which I hadn't done yet to that point. We were bleeding cash from every orifice. Yep. It was dire at that point in time. It was really, if we don't tighten this up right now, we may not make it another month. That fall, that winter, that spring was all about putting financial systems in place and tightening things. Getting a handbook in place, really creating and developing a culture of accountability, and making sure everyone's doing their part in their job. And I'm not certain I would have been forced to take a step back and look at the guts of the business had that not happened. So in retrospect, I think we're pretty fortunate.
Hey everyone, I'm Palmer Higgins and welcome to the Big Time Small Business Podcast. I interview owners, operators, and founders of the small businesses you see every day but don't hear enough about. We talk about the obstacles they have faced, the successes they have earned, and where their business is going to inspire and inform you in your own career. On this episode, I speak with Jeff Buckwalter, CEO of The Holy Doughnut, a Portland, Maine-based retail and wholesale donut company whose hand-cut, hand-glazed potato donuts have developed a crazed following both locally and beyond. With demand far exceeding supply for his donuts and persistent inquiries for expansion and even franchising, Jeff talks about his efforts to build the infrastructure necessary to support a growing company, the value of trust and accountability in developing his workforce, and the importance of conflict in a healthy organization. Jeff Buckwalter, CEO of Holy Doughnut, thanks a lot for being on the Big Time Small Business Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So Holy Doughnut, for the local listeners, is going to need no introduction. You guys have a devout following here in town. But for those that don't know what or who Holy Doughnut is, can you give us the quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, the Holy Doughnut, we are somewhat small, family-owned Maine Potato Doughnut Company here in Portland, Maine. We have 3 locations, 2 in Portland, 1 in Scarborough, and we make what we believe are the best potato donuts in the world from scratch every day.
I think a lot of people would agree that they are the best. Definitely not just in Maine, the best donuts, period, potato or otherwise. So let's go to the genesis of it. I think a potato donut, for those that haven't tried a Holy Doughnut, haven't had that revelatory experience, they're saying, that sounds weird. So why a potato donut? What is it about a potato donut?
The potato donut is really going to be a bit more moist and a bit more dense, kind of like the idea behind potato bread. It's going to give it a different mouthfeel. It's going to be a little bit more substantial, and it really maintains its moisture very well. And it's actually an old Northern Maine recipe that our founder, Lee Kellis, found and kind of tweaked and made her own a little bit, and she struck gold. Sure.
So I think that opens the door to a topic that I definitely want to touch on. Lee is your sister-in-law.
Correct.
So there's 2 things I want to talk about then. One is your entrance into the business.
Yeah.
And your role.
Yeah.
But then 2 is to talk about that family dynamic and how it's influenced Holy Doughnut, its growth, its evolution, its character.
I entered the Holy Donut in the fall of 2013. I'd spent a dozen or so years as a regional marketing director for a hotel and timeshare company, and did that for about a dozen years. And it had me traveling quite a bit. It was a pressure cooker of an industry, sales and marketing wise. And I just really ultimately wasn't happy. I knew that really wasn't where I was going to hang my hat. But it did provide a good living for my family and allowed for my wife to stay home with our kids when they were young. And so that was a trade-off that in retrospect was worth it. But I was unhappy in my career. And as Park Avenue started to get traction, my father-in-law would frequently say, we're going to get you into this business. I said, oh, okay. But with, a mortgage and 3 kids and, all of that, it wasn't financially prudent or possible for me to come into the business with one location. So as Lee and he began to have an appetite for a second location, then the conversations, grew in earnest in terms of me coming on board into the business and helping them from a business and a structure standpoint and from a financial standpoint, really, running it like a business. And so in 2013, September, I quit my job and we opened up Exchange Street 2 months later and, kind of jumped in with both feet. And
well, really just 1 foot though, right?
Really? Yeah, that's an interesting story there. On our first day of opening up Exchange Street, like any new opening, it was kind of crazy and kind of nuts. And halfway through our day, this was actually Halloween, so 5 years ago today, our fryer broke. And so we were kind of scrambling, getting donuts from Park Avenue and frying them over there to bring them over to Exchange, and trying to decide what we were going to do for the next day. On that short of notice, the only one we were able to find was in Boston. So we went down to Boston in my pickup truck, loaded up a fryer, drove back, got back into Portland maybe 9-ish at night, and it was raining. And I'm trying to lift it over the threshold, and my foot slipped out from under me, and the fryer came down on my ankle and crushed every bone in my right ankle. I wasn't walking on it until end of January. So November, December, January were rough months. I had reconstructive surgery. I have 11 screws and a titanium plate that are still kicking around in my ankle.
Talk about a labor of love.
Yeah, it was, it's very interesting in that regard, in that I'm not 100% certain that the Holy Donut would be here today if that didn't happen. And
you're talking about the accident?
Yes.
Breaking your ankle.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
It was, because opening that store was just diving in every day, there were 12, 16-hour days and just making donuts and selling donuts. But what had happened is that laying me up like that, I couldn't make donuts and I couldn't serve donuts. So I really dove into financials of the company, and which I hadn't done yet to that point. And it was a shoebox business. There was no P&Ls, there was no GL codes. It was a checkbook company. And we were, we weren't profitable. We were just kind of treading water, breaking even. And really, having to set up the accounting systems and all the general ledger codes and all that to really understand where we were bleeding. I think a lot of small companies bleed to death and don't even ever know where they were injured. Mm-hmm. And that's the situation that I think we kind of saw ourselves in. So had that not happened, had I just toiled away for another few months, we I think could have easily gone bankrupt.
Wow.
And then really understood where we were losing our shirt. Yeah. And that was in ingredient costs, labor costs, employees filling out their own time cards, and we were bleeding cash from every orifice. Yep. It was dire. At that point in time, it was really, if we don't tighten this up right now, we may not make it another month or two. Our overage could zap our profitability one day if we're not watching and forecasting properly. Days profits can go out the window pretty quickly. That fall, that winter, that spring was all about putting financial systems in place and tightening things, getting a handbook in place. Really creating and developing a culture of accountability, and making sure everyone's doing their part in their job. And I'm not certain I would have been forced to take a step back, and look at the guts of the business had that not happened. So in retrospect, I think we're pretty fortunate. So in time, we just, peeled back the onion and found some kind of ugly things that we had to address. And, we were selling donuts. We were underselling this product for a long time, and selling our wholesale product at a loss. Once we got and dove into what it really cost us to make a donut, that was a pretty scary number. And so that kind of smacked us in the face, and you couldn't really do anything about it other than
because you weren't recovering overhead.
We weren't
per donut basis, or you weren't even covering.
We weren't even
costs?
covering that. I mean, I think initially it's either $1.50 or $1.75, or what the first retail pricing point was for the donut, and it was almost $1.30 to make it.
Oof.
So
thin gross profit margin,
scary, right? And we were selling, wholesale donuts for 80 cents, but the challenge there was in scaling it, right? And I think Lee took a lot. Well, this is what it cost me to make it in my kitchen, but now you acquire overhead and you have employees and you have all these things, and it just that changed and that shift didn't happen. But we caught it in time, and we were able to make those adjustments, and those were kind of the storming years in the business. Those first couple of years of really putting processes, putting procedures in place, putting a manual in place, and it felt it was a very loosey-goosey business, and people liked that feel and that vibe. But also in that environment, there was a lack of accountability, and so sometimes people get really comfortable in that environment. And so the person who's maybe shifting or changing that's not going to be the most popular guy on the block, and that's okay. But it's, when your family's livelihood's on the line, you do whatever it takes.
Sure.
And so there was some tough decisions that had to be made. Some personnel didn't want to operate in that environment of accountability and increased efficiency. And so we had to part ways with some people who were really good people, but they just didn't feel like they wanted to be there into that new environment, where maybe there's not a spotlight or a microscope on, but, without a job description, it's easy to kind of push off accountability. And so job descriptions first, then an employee handbook, and all that kind of felt corporate a little bit to a lot of people. And so part of my sale I needed to do was to, sell them on how that's going to make them a happier, more productive employee.
Sure.
Right. And so, I don't like that. That feels corporate, but you also don't like when you come in and so-and-so didn't do their job, and now you have to do their part for them. You don't like that. So I'm going to help solve that part of that problem for you. Everyone's going to be accountable for doing what's on their plate.
So you just hit on a topic that you beat me to it. I was going to go there. Cause it's something that I've heard as well, is that corporate, what you're talking about is business process, business infrastructure, which in the world of small business is probably, I would argue, the limiting factor to growth. It's not the core product. In fact, I know plenty of people would buy Holy Donuts at 2x the demand, 3x the demand. I mean, I was just at a conference last night with Lee, your sister-in-law, who's saying we say no more than we say yes.
It's true.
So corporatizing, it's something that I hear a lot when we get involved with a company and we start talking about this infrastructure. It's one of the most common backlashes that we get as well. How do you strike that balance of being corporate, which allows you to scale, doesn't mean that you're going to just, take over the world and lose your values. It means you can do more of the good stuff, right? It's another thing that Lee talked about last night is the more we make, and we are a for-profit company, and we make money so we can do more good.
Absolutely.
So how do you strike that balance of corporate while maintaining values? And more importantly, potentially, how do you communicate that internally so people buy in?
That's, that's, I think, one of the more challenging responsibilities that Lee and I have in the company. And I think that pitch evolves over time, right? As I gain acumen and I gain comfort in my role. And it depends upon your audience. Every person's probably got to hear that a little bit differently. I use that analogy of just, somebody else doing their job properly before you. And so I think corporate is just, it's the awful C word, right? In small business but it all depends on how you frame that, right? You can say we want to be more organized, right? We want to have less chaos. We want to have more predictability. We want more job security. That's awesome. All those things come when you have that a little bit of that corporatiness, and how much is enough, right? And I think that's the interesting balance that will probably always be trying to find the right mix of. We don't want it to be so corporate-y that we lose the soul of our business as we try to scale this thing. But also, I think you're fooling yourself if you feel like you can really grow and scale a business without some of that corporate-iness. There's a reason that as you get up to 50 employees, your employee base grows. You have to have some certain things in place. You have to have effective HR mechanisms in place. You have to have non-disclosure agreements. You have to have non-competes. You have to, you're protecting what it is that you're building here. And if you don't, you're foolish. All of our lives are on the line. And our job is to make sure this is here for current employees, future employees, hopefully our kids.
For sure. So another thing that is associated with the ugly C word, the corporate, one, to your point, is organization and systemizing things. It sort of feels like it's ripping away some of the organic chaos that some people see as a positive. It's the sort of the culture, but growth is another one that I have had experience with too. Is and Mary Ellen talked about it when talking about the growth of Coffee by Design, opening up new locations, and all of a sudden you're not just the one shop, which has a very ethereal sort of feeling to it. Now you have 3 shops and you guys have a wholesale business. How has that impacted the sort of corporate feel of Holy Donut, and have you managed that internally?
That's really challenging. And I think where that really came to a head was when we opened up Scarborough. Scarborough was a different feel type of a location for us, as the old Tim Hortons at the corner of Haggis and Route 1 in Scarborough, where that was...
How much heat did you get for going into an old Tim's?
Not a lot. I mean, a funny story is that
last night Lee said point blank, Holy Donut is the anti Dunkin' Donuts.
We are the anti, and
Tim's is the Canadian Dunkin' Donuts. So I'm going to make a little bit of a parallel there.
Well, we did, and that was one of the funny things is that that location sat for a while. I looked at it and said, no, and kind of came back around to it. And Alan, God bless him, he just wants 100 of these things, right? He's since passed, unfortunately, but Lee wouldn't even walk into the building when I went over to show it to her.
Because it was an old Tim Hortons.
Because it was an old Tim Hortons, because it was corporate feel. And so, but I think that was one of our first initial challenges, was how do we get the stale corporateness out of that location? And is our culture strong enough to overcome that? I believe that the answer to that is yes, but I suppose that that's still not fully answered yet. That was really hard. That larger location, Route 1 exposure. It's not this little hole in the wall where, Alan and Lee and myself were there with hammers and nails and paint buckets trying to pretty it up on the cheap. We actually had the infrastructure and the capital to, I say, do it right, in that we, really laid out the space with greater efficiencies, and we brought the manufacturing extension partnership in there, and they helped us lay it out for workflow and all of those things, which were a bit foreign to us at that time. But I think Lee did a masterful job in terms of the decor of the building, the exterior paint. And I think the rest of our company did a great job in just extending genuine kindness to our customer base, and not, getting too big for our britches. We're still this little small family business. And I think that's, that image that you project is really about how you run your business and how you treat your people. And hopefully we're continuing to do a good job at that.
So I know growth is something that you're thinking about right now. It's very timely. So can you talk about sort of the status today, how you think about growth, the opportunities facing you, and how do you sort of weigh the risk reward, the pros, cons of sort of tackling that growth? Because as we've already mentioned, I think it's pretty obvious the demand is there. It's just a question of how do you tackle it? If you want to at all.
Yeah. I mean, to Lee's point, the other day is that we say no a lot. We have lots of people knocking on our doors for franchises and for new locations. And, that's interesting and that's cool. And Boston comes knocking, or, Faneuil Hall, all those types of things. But where I think we've done a really good job at is really staying disciplined, and not outpacing our human resources and infrastructure. We understand, I think, pretty well where we're still at in the grand scheme of things and where our work lives. For us to still, be able to work on our platform and our base and our structure to accommodate whatever chunks of growth we choose to bite off here in the near future. So we do a lot of development with our staff and our employees and our managers. We're committed to, at least I think this year we're doing 16 different management and development training sessions with all of our management staff. And that's really, I think, our ongoing challenge. I think Lee and I both envision us having more locations in the future, and we certainly do. But the how is something that we're really focused on. On some level there's always going to be trade-offs as you scale a company, and really trying to make good, sound decisions on what trade-offs are fair ones to make, and which ones can we never, ever step on as we start to grow and scale the business. That secret sauce has to always be in play. And so part of our work right now is really determining and listening more to our customers, but more formally polling our customers for them to help us understand exactly what they love about us and make sure that what we believe is vital to the core of our business is what our customers are seeing as well. I think, as we go down this road, we're going to find some things that maybe we've been hung up on, like, oh, this is critical. And our customers are like, yeah, we don't care about that, but we care about this over here. Don't ever not do this. And so as we've, looked, what part of our business is a very labor intensive business, on a busy summer weekend, we're still going to cut 15,000 donuts by hand between our 3 shops. And that's challenging, to manage that metric and that labor with, maybe 25, 30 different production people across 3 shops, all having to hit their numbers in order for this to be a profitable venture. That's terribly challenging to do, particularly in this labor market. That's as razor thin as I've ever seen it. And so we have a lot of companies that come to us and tell us, you need to change your formula. One of our challenges in scaling this product is that our dough is pretty unique, and it doesn't behave well in most any traditional donut cutting equipment that's, less than 6 figures. Beyond that, you can get into hoppers and pressurized, extrusion and all of those types of things, which we're not there yet. But that's, we've held firm to that. I'm like, nope, we're not changing what got us here.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that, you're saying no, and I think that's a very powerful word. It's also come up on this podcast before. It's very hard for an entrepreneur to say no, but it's also quite essential to say no. You probably have to say no more than you say yes, because if you're successful, that's going to lead to a lot of inquiries, and that's going to lead to a lot of areas of people trying to pull you into tangential areas. And if you do too much of that, you're going to lose what you had in the first place. So what are you going to be looking for to know that you got to a point where you can take on that next bit of growth, right? Because I'm assuming here, or I'm talking about a growth of sort of step level change growth, not the organic growth of the Scarborough location, pumping out incrementally more donuts in a day. It's a new location, or the monstrous decision of going franchise, or bringing on, bring on growth equity and a partner to go national, or something crazy like that. What are you going to be looking at to say, all right, this is we've gotten to a point where the platform, you talked about the platform before, is strong enough or built out enough that we can take on that next increment?
Mm-hmm. I think, one of my biggest challenges is determining. I think if you wait till you're ready, it's kind of like having kids. You'll never have them. But when are you ready enough? And for me, it's looking at the growth of our managers, the growth of our profitability, growth of our predictability, in terms of all of our processes. I have to see progress, growth, and consistency in those areas. And I also need that bench strength to develop, so that we can continue to really feed that management team from within. We've been super lucky at this point in time to have the capital for future growth. But none of that matters if I don't have the human infrastructure to manage those things. So for me, it's the development of our management team, and the right locations, the right opportunities, and the right business partners that surface along the way. I think a good coach and a good CEO is always pushing. But how far is too far? Mm-hmm. Everybody needs to live just north of their comfort zone. I can certainly admit that I've been guilty of pushing people maybe a little bit too far beyond it. But I think, for Liam and certainly for myself, we are terribly invested in making sure that this company fulfills its potential. And it's really not about donuts. The donuts are the conduit. We are we have a lot that we can bring to the communities that we do business in. We have a lot of opportunities that we can bring for our budding managers and our staff. Being able to see somebody who was maybe a bit down on their luck when they came to work for us, who's now maybe occupying a supervisor or manager role. That's why we do this. And if we can do that and be that type of a destination, then the more of these opportunities for growth, whether that's more locations, whether it's for more profitability or really making those decisions on where we're going to take this company, become a little bit more evident. But the biggest, I think, factor that I look at is, are we ready personnel wise? It's, opening up a new store, great. That may cost X amount of money to go do that. We do the site selection. We pick the right location. But if I don't have a good leader in place, that place will not be profitable and it won't achieve its potential. In the last couple of years, we've seen tremendous growth and profitability as we've made refinements and made better business decisions. But I think it's also been, we've kind of achieved a little bit of a false EBITDA in that, the number is great, but is that a sustainable number relative to other people in our industry? And so I think I fell in the trap of maybe trying to do too much with too little in terms of human resources. And I wasn't making enough investments in training my management staff. So all of that was, relatively glaring, and I had to swallow hard and be like, look, that's a mistake. So making sure that, we had to make sure we're adjusting pay plans to make sure we're paying not only fairly, but we like to pay 5 to 10% better than any competitor in that similar field. I don't want my management staff dealing with bottom of the barrel candidates or employees. So we do pay a bit more, but we ask for a bit more. So I really had to, Investige was fantastic in terms of helping me identify that, yeah, that's great, but how long can you work 80 hours a week? How long can you be everywhere? You can't, right? So if you're really going to scale this thing, you better start investing, some of that capital that you're saving right now, into managers, leaders, and extra layers. Mm-hmm. And so from an accounting and HR standpoint, we've made some great strides there. And so now a training manager / area manager, that will allow my operations manager to do more of his job, which will allow me to do more of my job. And so I can work where I'm the most valuable, in the organization. So it's just, opening my eyes a little bit in terms of what it really means to run a company of this size and to grow it to the size that Lee and I both believe it can achieve.
And is that hard? Because what you're essentially talking about is hiring yourself out of certain roles, replacing 100%. Yourself and delegating.
Our job is to start things and hand them off. Yep. Start them and hand them off. And that requires a lot of trust, to be very honest. And I think that's something that I struggle with. I think probably everybody does. But at the end of the day, you're going to be limited in terms of how much you can grow an organization. And so my job is really to get things done through others.
What happens when they mess up?
Pardon me?
What happens when they mess up? That's what I get told all the time.
That's the trade-off, right? Yeah. No one's perfect. And so you can either cap yourself in terms of what you're going to do in your business, or you can extend trust, right? And when you extend trust, you're going to get disappointed sometimes. That's just the way of it. But I think that's kind of the price of growth, right? And so now, you develop that person, and now all of a sudden they can run with that thing, right? And we check in, we monitor, and we manage. But if you're not willing to let things go, I don't believe you can really grow an organization.
No, I totally agree. I was just leading you there. I think you talk about this a lot, and you see this a lot in the world of small business. Is it definitely the more hats an owner, operator, CEO wears, the higher margins are going to be, right? Because they're taking on a bunch of different roles, right. But it's also the restrictor plate for their company that 100%. They can't. There's only 24 hours in a day, and at some point they're going to want some balance in their life, and they're going to get some burnout. Or if it's a trust thing, they're not going to be able to trust anyone. So certainly you can be disappointed, but I think you conversely can also be quite surprised.
100%. I think that's one of the things that I love the most in my role, is being able to hand something off to somebody and see them do it better than I could do it. That's awesome. And just by virtue of doing that, what does that tell them on how much you trust them? And once you give away trust to somebody and they believe that you trust them to do that job, I think, provided you've made a good decision on that person, that magic can happen there.
Yep. So throughout the conversation thus far, you've talked a lot about process, and you've referenced metrics. And last night, when I was listening to Lee talk, she mentioned that you are the business guy. So what do you, when you want to get a quick look at Holy Donut,
Mm-hmm.
what are you looking at to see the health of the company? Maybe it's quantitative, maybe it's qualitative, maybe it's a mixture of both. But when you're looking to sort of take stock of the company, what are you looking at?
Well, I mean, certainly, obviously the P&L and the balance sheet, are going to tell the ultimate story. And that's, I think the dashboard, to run your business. But, looking at those barometric reports, so those 3, 4, 5, 6 reports that if those things are right, most everything is pretty right in the business, whether that's food costs, labor costs relative to revenue, looking at, overage, looking at, average tickets, looking at number of bodies and, number of transactions each store is doing on a daily basis. And there's also the feel thing, taking the temperature of your staff. It's one thing to maybe get great metrics, but if it's at the cost of morale, that's not a fair trade-off to make. And so that
could be another metric, right? I mean, you've referenced turnover, so that's clearly a metric you're looking at.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, if we have excessive turnover in a location, then the first place they have to look is management. Or is there poor training in place? We've already established that we kind of stink at training, to be very honest. And also, we have, a lot of my time outside of managing metrics is really coaching and developing our young managers. We have a bullpen full of green managers, for the most part. And they're to your point earlier, they're going to make mistakes. But, I guess try to keep them within bumpers. Right. Within these bumpers, you can go ahead and skin your knee and fall down and we'll pick you back up. But they just can't make any big mistakes. So it just, for me, it's monitoring our financials. It took us quite, a long time to be able to close our books every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks,
we finally got there this year.
Close.
We do a mid-month close. And just, they were in the first couple of years, once we got our accounting system up, I think we were closing 4 months in arrear. It was after the fact accounting, which is just obviously not good. So I have to take my hat off to our accountant and my office manager, Lauren. I pushed on them really hard. Prior to opening up Scarborough, we were still maybe 2 months in arrears before we were closing a month. And that just, left us too vulnerable. So I've been pushing that, we're going to close every 2 weeks. And then the next step is going to be a weekly snapshot. So that we know exactly where we're at and we can understand financially where we're at before we go make any big weighty business decisions. It's critical.
Yeah, no question. Mid-month close. I think all of our portfolio companies are screaming right now, please, not us. But that's incredible. And for something with such a high velocity that you guys have, I understand the benefit for sure. Yeah.
No, you got it. I mean, you have to know where we're at all times financially.
Yep.
So you can get in front of trends before they come too bad.
How about one thing that's very top of mind internally here when I talk to business owners and they're talking about their business is operational in addition to financial data and leveraging technology in a way to help them sort of understand their business better. Because I would argue that everything that happens in a business will impact a financial statement in some way. So increased turnover will lead to probably lower productivity for employees. So if you know how to look, it will come out somewhere, but it might not necessarily be called out explicitly, and it might be overshadowed or drowned out or covered up by some other factor that's also impacting a P&L or a balance sheet. So operational data is sort of a leading indicator of financial data. So to what extent have you implemented that at Holy Doughnut? To what extent do you look at that as sort of part of your dashboard of the health of Holy Doughnut?
So yes, our POS system is actually one of the things we're going to be migrating away from. It's not a great POS system. I'm not going to bash them on here, but at the end of the day, we need our 3 different systems don't talk to each other. Right. So whether that's payroll, whether it's accounting, whether it's our POS system, we have to do a lot of manual jiggering to kind of get all these things to work and talk to one another. So that's our next step this fall and winter is to find a POS system that will work with us in our current state and also as we continue to grow. But yes, we look at one of the things, one of the trade-offs we've had to make, at least with our current POS system, is not knowing exactly how many of every flavor that we sell through the POS system. And one of the reasons for that is just, and it's a first world problem. But in the summer, our lines, if, in a 2 dozen order, if they had to punch every one, across, maybe 1,100 transactions at one store, how much is that really slowing down my line? So we can get to total donut sales. We can get to total gluten-free. We can get to total specialty, but we don't in the system understand how many maple versus apple versus, those types of things. Those things are still tracked manually. That forecasting model is still not terribly sophisticated for us. Some of it is still feel. A lot of it is still number management. But we're still doing a lot of things relatively archaically.
Sure. So again, as you think about sort of the growth and you're thinking about investing in infrastructure, you're talking about managing 3 different systems: payroll, POS, financial, and there's a lot of manual stuff. In the reorg or sort of the new system, the new POS system you're bringing in to tie all these systems together, what question are you going to be able to answer once you've done that you haven't been able to answer yet? So what is the gain associated with the pain of changing POS systems? Because they are notorious for having high switch costs.
Oh, yeah, you're telling me. I think we'll probably walk away from $50,000 of infrastructure when we do change. And they build them so that you can't use them with the next system, right? Yep. It's really, I think, being able to have quicker access to forecasting data and being able to really slice and dice our labor components much more quickly, having real-time labor focus.
So can you talk about why both of those are important?
Yeah, in our business, being able to forecast, having a handmade artisan product, if we have 80 dozen left over at the end of the day, that your profits are toast. And that's just, it's been one of our big challenges is determining when. All of our different donuts have a different lead time to get them from cold dough in the cooler to on the shelf. Some are hot glazed, some are cold glazed. You have to wait for them to come to temperature. So those lead times or replenishment triggers have been really challenging to kind of identify. And it's a one-day product, so we're not selling it the next day. So whatever's not there is, going out as a donation or to Preble or somewhere in the community. But that's goodwill, but goodwill is expensive sometimes. So I need to be able to forecast quicker. I'd love to be able to put in a couple of the systems we're looking at, maybe put a weather overlay over the financial data to understand, because all 3 of our shops behave very differently in different types of weather, which is a very interesting thing. Scarborough's just starting to kind of trend out, and we're kind of seeing what happens on a hot day there versus the Old Port versus our Park Avenue store. And then real-time labor. At the end of the day, if, there's a snowstorm that hits Portland, I know Scarborough's still going to produce. I know Park's going to be okay, but I know that, Exchange Street's going to be death, right? So we got to be able to cut that staff. So right now we're kind of looking and measuring and doing manual calculations every hour to see where the revenue is relative to who do you have staffed on labor, who's going to go, who's going to stay. There's an easier way to get there.
Your managers are doing that on an hourly basis?
Hourly basis, yeah.
Every day?
Every day.
Wow.
And so that's how we forecast right now.
Velocity of donuts is dropping relative to the overhead that stores.
Right. Relative to that, what's that nut to crack.
Labor in real time.
In real time.
Wow.
Yeah. The hard part is, and that's one of the other challenges from a production standpoint, particularly at our Exchange Street store. It is teeny tiny. Right? You've been in there. It's a matchbox. We call it the mosh pit. In the summertime, it's nuts. But, the kitchen, we've continuously robbed space from front of the house to give to the kitchen, to pump 5,000 donuts out of that kitchen on a busy summer Saturday. It's like, it still amazes me that those guys are in there doing that. And so part of our challenge in that space has been, we have to then in the overnight, and we start maybe 10 o'clock at night during the summer to get started for the next day. The front of the house becomes production space. So it's all production space, and we tear it all down and it all goes into the back. And, so we've revamped that kitchen, so many times, but on a busy day like that, we may do 70-ish% of our product before the doors open, just so that everybody can have room to work once the doors open. And so something crazy happens and we get stung, with something that we didn't pay attention to or didn't look at. We may be sitting on 200 or 300 or 400 dozen donuts, if we don't do our math right. So part of our challenge, and we've gotten better in time at becoming more nimble, and producing more throughout the day instead of, pushing that inventory into the day and crossing our fingers, hoping all of our our crystal ball was right. Really getting a slightly more sophisticated in terms of, walking that number a little bit further into the day, which is every fall. That's what I talk about. I talk spring and fall are the hardest times to call a number in our business. This week is kind of the first cliff of the season for us. So every fall we tend to have huge overage because everyone's still kind of hungover from producing, in the summertime. And in the spring, I got to tell everybody, gosh, it's spring again, right? And then, so they sell out early, right? And so it's just a constant juggling act for us.
Is it that bad to sell out early? And I understand you're missing revenue.
It's interesting.
But when I think about the dynamism with which you manage labor costs and the margin of error you have on eating up your margin on waste, I would think that the benefit of systematically underproducing to drive that certainty, you'll piss off some customers, but you also drive scarcity. Mm-hmm. So they'll be pissed off, but they won't want to admit it that they want Holy Donut more. Mm-hmm. You obviously thought about this because you're smiling right now. So tell me about it.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, and certainly, when we opened up Exchange and that just, that did so much for our brand, having that exposure at that location in the Old Port. We've been accused on many occasions of manufacturing scarcity. But I promise you we were not that brilliant about thinking about that.
You wouldn't be the only company that does that.
Pardon me?
You wouldn't be the only company that
I know
does that.
Several that do it very well. But for us, it was just figuring out how to meet demand. It was the reality. And I was smiling when you were saying that because this year, I had to put my foot down and just say, we're not selling out anymore. At the end of the day, we've been at this for 5 years. We owe it to our customers to have our act together to make enough donuts. So, when those people drive 2 or 3 hours, and we're terribly fortunate enough that people do that to come eat one of our donuts, kind of our responsibility to have them there. And so we really, I think they let us off the hook in the beginning. Oh, it's a small, they just sell out whenever they sell out. But as we gain traction and, we get media exposure that we're terribly fortunate to be getting, I think we have an obligation to deliver to these people who are making a pilgrimage to come eat our product. And so one thing, I realized is, but, I wasn't being very clear. And as I, coach my managers on that, I wasn't doing it myself in terms of saying, this is exactly how much product I want you to have by flavor every day at this time. Right. I just said, don't sell out anymore. All right. Well, they needed more direction than that. Mm-hmm. And so, this year was really kind of like that line in the sand with our stores and our management staff that, it's your responsibility to not sell out of your product. And so let's figure out a way to do that. But I don't want to have overage. Well, we got to figure that out. Right. And so now we're allowed to have a % of overage. Right. And that within that margin, you're good to go. You have to have, within 5% margin on overage and have at least half of your flavors available till the bell. That's the deal.
Sure. So when you look at Holy Donut, when you think about Holy Donut, do you think about it in discrete business lines? Because you do have wholesale, you go to Whole Foods, Coffee by Design, and I'm sure others. You have a special order business that you talked about is where you say no almost the most because you just hit capacity and, the holiday rush. Hey, I have my family coming over. I want 14 dozen donuts and exactly these varieties. Like, we can't do that. So do you think about it in those 3 discrete business lines? And if so, what are the state of each and how do you think about them differently right now?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is yes, I do. The retail is king for us. I mean, that's just, that tends to be the beast that gets fed first, are the retail locations. One of the biggest,
because that's the way it's always been or because that's by intent?
A bit of both, and the margins are a little healthier, on the retail end. But as we become more proficient at refining our production methods, those wholesale margins are looking more attractive for sure.
More predictable too. No waste.
More predictable, all of those things play. And then it comes down to, available space and time to manufacture that product. And so that's been something that Lee and I have discussed a great deal about, is having a production facility where those things can come out of. And so we've spent a great deal of time talking and planning about that. And that's something that's probably pretty near in our horizon. We say a no way too much to a lot of wholesale business. There are stores that have 40, 50 locations. They're like, yeah, we want you here. There are opportunities in other areas of Maine that we've had to say no to, that could be very substantial and be very good for brand reach that we just don't have the facilities and the capacity to do.
Does that open up the ability for you to produce, to still remain in your ethos of hand cut, handmade every single day, so there's no carryover? If you had a consolidated production facility, would that open up the ability for you to have pop-up retail stores, which didn't need to have the kitchen space behind them, as long as you were really tight on transportation?
That's a very interesting question, and we've gone and poured over that for, well, as long as I've been in the business.
Yep.
How important is it to have a hot shop versus a cold shop? The jury is still out a little bit. That's one of the key questions in our customer survey, about how important that is, that you can actually see this product being made here. Right now, we believe that to be important. And we believe that to be one of our bigger differentiators between our competition, is having a product that's cooked in store within sight of our customers. There aren't too many of our competitors that have, more than a handful of locations that still do that. Mm-hmm. And if I just put my bean counter hat on, I'm like, yeah, of course we produce them in a facility. Are you nuts? But our concern is how much cachet do we lose in doing that? And so, to this day, we purposely do some things the hard way. Because right now we believe that makes a difference. It doesn't mean we're right. But it just means right now that's where we're hanging our hat. Sure. Is that, we do this thing by hand and we do them fresh from scratch in every store every day. It'd be great to not have to build out a store and earmark 70, 80 grand for hoods and fryers and infrastructure and put all that in a facility where that can be done at a much more efficient rate. But that's one of the questions that I'm very interested to see how that's going to come back from our customer base, just how important that is to them. Because if you look at some of our wholesale customers like Lowe's or Whole Foods, or some other place that we do business, and they don't care at all about that.
And my guess is they sell through.
They do.
And everyone knows it's a Holy Donut.
Yes.
I mean, you go to Whole Foods, I know I'm getting a Holy Donut when I go to that rack and I pick a donut.
And so that's,
even if it doesn't say Holy Donut trademark.
Right. Correct. And so that's, that could very well be something that I or Lee are hanging on to unnecessarily. We may be just a little bit, too close to it, personally to make an objective decision. So that's where, really leaning on some outside opinions and really pulling our customers, hopefully in a sophisticated enough way that it yields some data that will help us make a proper decision.
So, man, you keep going where I'm already going to be going. You keep beating me to the punch. Steve Jobs, very famous for saying that customers don't know what they want until you give it to them. So when you talk about asking your customers and saying, like, I hope the customers tell us where to go and give us some good data. There's lots of literature about how you write and the wording that you use for surveys can impact customer results. I mean, we are, economics would say we are rational automatons, but the reality is quite different. So how do you juxtapose that, saying, I want my customers to tell me because I'm going to believe them, they're the soul of my business, to the understanding that, maybe they're not actually leading you to the right place.
Yeah. No,
maybe they're not saying what they think they're saying.
In the end, their word's not going to be gospel in our eyes. And so we took a fair amount of time and sought guidance, and had a company formally walk us through the survey process so that we're not, unintentionally leading them down a path and, kind of cooking our own books of opinion, so to speak. And so that's, that will play a role, right? I mean, our own data, our customer data, and our gut feel, there's a triad there of where that decision needs to be made. I read the same thing with Steve Jobs, and that's totally true. And so you kind of have to wade through those comments a bit and through those survey results. At the end, hopefully we'll get a little bit closer to having more. And for me, it's about just having the confidence in your decision, right? And if you fail fast. Right, there's nothing that you can't unplug and undo if you step in it and make a wrong decision. But eventually, you can only collect so much data. You got to make a decision.
Sure. So how does that manifest itself when you're talking about consolidating production? Fail fast, great. But to some extent, you make that decision. You can't necessarily fail fast. You've signed a lease, and you kind of plugged into it. And so this is another conversation we have a lot. Is there's some cases where there's very easy test cases. You can do mini tests and you test it and you do it and it's great and you do more of it. In other cases, the initial test case is so big that you kind of have to be more right, more certain at least, or at least more pot committed. You can't fail as fast. So how do you think about that?
I mean, those are big, weighty decisions. At the end of the day, as you talk about, maybe we create a cold shop, right? I mean, I'm always going to look at what my outs are, right? And we opened up Scarborough, right? That was a stretch for our little company, both, infrastructure wise, financial, and taking on a big place that might have this presence of being this retail type of, or corporate thing. For me, if I can survive the worst case scenario, then let's go. If you had
then
your
the
bets
upside
right,
scenario is all gravy.
Pardon me?
If you can survive the downside, then the upside is
Yeah,
all
I
gravy.
mean, at the end of it, I'm like, okay, we can, when we decided on Scarborough's, okay, here's my out. If I sell all this equipment for pennies on the dollar, if I have to pay, year's month worth of rent to get the hell out of here, is that survivable? And will the other two stops still be able to go? Yes. All right, let's go. And so if you can do that, and that's, a very sophisticated way to look at it, but that's, going forward with confidence is everything. If you're doubting it, you're just not going to be fully committed. And so I think finding those situations where you can put yourself in a situation where you have to be fully committed and burn the boats, as they say, then that works.
Third time, I was just about to say burn the boats.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you have an out, that's not synonymous with burning the boats. So which is it? Well,
I think, for instance, when I jumped in with both feet, I didn't have an out to come into this business. So that was a burn the boat type of situation. Yep. Where with Scarborough, it was burn the boats, but I got enough trees to build a raft over here, right? To get the hell out of here if it doesn't work. I don't think you always have the luxury of outs. But when you do, hopefully more often than not, you do have somewhat of an out, or you at least believe in what your company has to give to this new venture.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I want to wrap up the interview with a couple questions I ask everyone. And the first one is imagine there's a magic pause button in life. You get 4 months. You can't take a vacation. You have to allocate that time to furthering the Holy Doughnut in some way. But none of the day-to-day stuff is taking up any of your time. So how do you allocate those 4 months?
I'll probably try to spend as much time as I can talking with people who are doing what I believe our company is going to be trying to do. If I could take a little tour around the country and talk with some of my mentors, some people that I respect a great deal, and learn a little bit face to face from some of the great business leaders that I admire, I think that would be something I would love to do.
Okay. So then the obvious tack on question there is people who have done what you want to do. So what is that?
I think scaling a business like ours to a regional level, in New England. I would like to be New England known synonymously with the Holy Doughnut. We've been fortunate to become somewhat iconic in the southern Maine market, and I believe that we can have that type of presence throughout New England. And I think that's where I ultimately see the potential of our company going.
New England runs on Holy Doughnut.
Ooh,
I'm just kidding. It was right there. I had to do it.
I served it up.
Yeah. All right. Next one is very similar. $1 million lands on your doorstep. The only string attached to it is you have to reinvest it back into Holy Doughnut. How are you allocating that capital?
I'm building a production facility.
Where?
That's the $1 million question right now. That is most likely just south of Portland. As we look at future dots in the map, more of those dots are going to be south of the Portland market. And that would be where I would put those funds to work.
How large is the circle around the production facility that would allow you to sort of, when you say more of the dots on the map, how large is that sphere for the production facility?
Right now, our initial assessments are about 90 miles.
Wow. Hour and a half. Okay. That's quite a bit. That would take you definitely down to Portsmouth and beyond. Yeah, you're smiling. Fair enough. Last question, most open-ended. What haven't I asked that I should have?
Probably how challenging it is to work in a family business.
Okay.
I think that was one of the things that we were very fortunate with. And I think that relationship, it was hard all the way around because, as I said earlier, it's hard to cater to two relationships at once. But with family, we have a very tight family, and I think we're very fortunate in that this will never interrupt our family. Easy to say that, harder to do that. it's hard to say, well, it's just business, right? It's never just business, right? There's always an element of a personalness, and people have egos, and then they have, feelings, right? And it's hard to really speak to the business truth and not maybe offend somebody. But we always had that ability. Some of my most fond memories of Alan, my father-in-law, who passed a year or so ago. Him and I used to have knockdown, drag-out arguments and vehemently disagree, but then be able to laugh and have a beer at dinner and understand that we put it there, and we had a healthy mutual respect for one another. And if we all kind of boil it down, in those moments, you can get heated and things can get elevated, but that just means you're passionate, right? And so there's nothing inherently wrong with that, as long as things don't get to a personal attacking level. It's just, I disagree with you on that point, maybe vehemently, and that's okay, right? As long as we all believe it's for the greater good. So we had that ability to compartmentalize it a little bit. Not saying none of us ever went home with ruffled feathers, because we certainly did. But I think we all trusted the genuineness of the other person. You have to allow people to be passionate and to disagree. I think that's how you get to the heart of matters. I think too frequently people don't speak their mind, right? And it's just too easy, too smooth sailing. Whenever that goes on for too long, in our business, I was like, all right, somebody's not speaking their mind here. Not all of us are agreeing upon this. And so how do you ignite a little bit of that conflict? And there has to be trust at the core. Sure. If you trust that person, whether it's a friend or a family member, you can give them a little bit of leeway, and you can have some heated arguments, but then have the discipline to let it go.
So I think that is a unique perspective. Not having enough discord, not having enough disagreement is probably an indicator that people aren't speaking their minds. And to your point, a disagreement, especially a vehement one, really is just an underpinning of people caring. And so if they're not disagreeing, then obviously the corollary is they're not caring enough, and that's a bigger problem. And one thing we say is same thing, family comes first. But then second, if you have a problem, it's your job to bring it up. And if you don't, that's your problem. That ceases to become our problem.
That's fair.
It is your imperative, not someone else's. I think it's commendable that you sort of sound like you play the role of, hey, if we're all agreeing too much, someone's not speaking their mind, and we have to draw that out. Otherwise it's going to fester. And that's really what's going to blow up.
Yeah, it does. And it comes from, just experience and having gone through that, and myself maybe having held on to things historically in my career. And as we coach our young managers, right, it's, you're just yesing here, right? And, we all want employees and engaged staff. Sometimes if you're really engaged and you're bright and you're confident, there's going to be conflict there. As long as it's productive conflict. It's not, conflict for the sake of me wanting to be right. It's conflict for what's actually best for this company and this organization or that department or that store. If that's your guiding principle, then conflict is healthy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an awesome thing to wrap up on. Jeff, thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Big Time Small Business Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review and share the show with a friend. To access show notes and subscribe to our distribution list, be sure to visit us at chenmarkcapital.com/podcast. That's Chenmark, CHENMARK, capital.com/podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Chen Holdco, CHEN Holdco. Last but not least, we'd love to hear from you, so please drop us a line at podcast@chenmarkcapital.com. Thanks a lot.